Hi, everybody. This is Soul Seeing for Lent, brought to you by NCR, the National Catholic Reporter. I'm Mike Leach, your host, and our guest today is one of my favorite persons in the whole wide world, Sister Jeannine Gramick. And I know she's a favorite and a loved one of yours too, or you wouldn't be watching. Um, but for those who are unfamiliar with the story of Sister Jeannine's journey, Jeannine, hi.
Hi.
I'm gonna give a little brief intro that I wrote. Okay, Jeannine,
Sure.
and then we'll bust into it. Um, Sister Jeannine is the chair and co-founder of New Ways Ministry. It goes back more than 50 years when young Sister Jeannine Gramick, along with Father Bob Nugent, began responding to the spiritual needs of gay and lesbian Catholics and their families. That was quite an impossible time to
Mhm.
do that. Since that time, New Ways Ministry has become the leading advocate for justice and equality for LGBTQ Catholics and reconciliation within the larger church and the civil communities. Now, during these past 50 some years, Sister Jeannine has helped thousands of people in pain, and she has suffered great pain herself for doing which was and still is a courageous ministry. Her story is an unlikely one and a powerful one, I think, filled with spiritual love and grace. This beautiful person on the right side of your screen taught mathematics in a Baltimore high school in the 1960s as a young sister, and she was smart. So she soon became an associate professor of math at the College of Notre Dame in Maryland. And when she was going for a PhD at the University of Pennsylvania, she became friends with a gay man. And that began this long journey. Now, since that time, she's written and edited lots of books. She's the subject of a wonderful documentary film called In Good Conscience, Sister Jeannine Gramick's Journey of Faith by the Emmy Award winning director Barbara Rick. Um, she's won lots of awards, as you might expect, including international ones, one from Turkey, of all places. And in 2006, became a laureate for the International Mother Teresa Award for her role as a human rights activist. Now, Jeannine, I know that even though you have had such a wonderful life, inside of you is still the little girl
Mhm.
who grew up in Philadelphia and went to Catholic grammar school and high school, and you just wanted to be a good girl and to serve Jesus. And now that Lent is beginning for both of us who are a little older now, what was Lent for you like a child?
Well, as a child, I did, of course, what Sister said, and that was fasting and well, of course, abstinence on Fridays. But then, you could do it other days as well. But it meant um, doing things that were difficult for you, and well, one thing, of course, I loved candy, and so I would make a resolution to give up candy, especially chocolates, which I still love. And I must confess I don't give them up so much now, but I should. Well, it's Lent, so here we are. Um, Also, we had um, the missions, and the Marinol sisters were urging us to adopt a pagan baby in in China. So those were some of the things that I would be doing during Lent.
Hmm. Okay. And Lent is a wonderful season that's not just a religious observation, but it's kind of a metaphor for life. And the reason I wanted to have you on, Gene, because Lent can be 40 days, or it can be 4 months, or it can be 40 years.
Mhm.
And in a way, you experienced 40 years of Lent and then had a remarkable Easter last year. So let's begin. What inspired you to begin your ministry to the LGBTQ community?
Well, it was my personal friendship with this young man named Dominic and his friends. I mean, I believe so much happens, so much good happens because of personal relationships. And I had always been a person who was concerned about justice. And when I met Dominic and his friends and spoke with them, I realized how unjustly they were being treated, not only in society, but by our church. And as a person who loves our church, I felt our church needed to do better. So, well, to answer your question briefly, it was the personal friendship that drew me into this ministry.
Yeah. You know, and I know, and most people know, that gays, to come out and admit you're gay, is a huge thing. And back in the 60s and the 70s, what was that like for a gay or lesbian person?
Well, this young man, Dominic, had been thrown out of the house by his parents when they discovered that he was gay. He entered a religious community. He entered a Franciscan community, but left shortly thereafter because he felt that being gay was incompatible with religious life. Of course, it is not, but that was the thinking way back in the 60s and 70s. And he just experienced social and religious ostracism. Um, I think it was very hard for him and others like him that I met um, to bear, especially the rejection of family and church that they felt so close to. Um, so it was just horrendous, and that's what moved my heart.
Hmm. Gays love the church,
Yes,
um, especially gay Catholics, and they go to church even though over the years the institutional church has said you're disordered, there's something wrong with you, um, and you're going to go to hell if you express your love in any physical way.
yeah.
Um, when you talk to parents who have all these mixed emotions about that, what kind of a conversation do you have?
Well, it's interesting. Way back in the 70s and the 80s, even into the 90s, most of the Catholic parents that I spoke with were heartbroken because their gay or lesbian children weren't going to church. And they, for the most part, the many of the parents that I spoke with loved their children, accepted their children, but they were heartbroken and put the onus, if you will, on their children because they weren't going to church. But I saw a turnaround in among the parents in the conversations I had with parents at the toward the end of the 90s and in about 20 years ago. The questions changed. The questions weren't, well, why isn't my gay son going to church? The question was, well, why doesn't the church accept my gay son? Because my heterosexual daughter can get married in the church, but my gay son can't. So the questions from the parents now, for the most part, are questions addressed to the institutional church. Why is not the church changing and accepting my gay child or my lesbian daughter or my transgender child? Because I love and accept them. So what's wrong with the church?
Hmm.
So the attitude of parents, it's interesting to see how it has developed over the years.
Hmm. What I find so sad, Jeannine, is that these young people, all they want is to have the kind of life that they grew up with loving parents and a good Catholic home and a neighborhood and a community. They just want what their parents had. And the church is
Exactly.
saying you can't have that, right?
Exactly. Well, now with Pope Francis is urging us to say, yes, you can have that. You should have that. Do not reject your children, no matter what they've done or who they are, or even if you don't understand. Just recently, um, several weeks ago, when he at one of his audiences on Wednesday, Pope Francis urged parents to love their gay and lesbian children, and uh, I see my job now mostly in terms uh, of reaching out to figures in the church institution to help them to get on track with Pope Francis's agenda.
Yeah.
So that's where we are in the church, in my opinion.
What does Pope Saint Francis, what does Pope Francis say to gay, lesbian, transgender young people and kids?
His message is one of love, and he always preaches love and mercy of God. And he urges gay and lesbian and transgender persons to be in their family, to love their family, to stay in the family, to uh, go to church, to or or if it's not church, wherever you find spiritual consolation. So the message of Pope Francis is to be who you are. Now, I probably Pope Francis and I mean, I don't understand transgender people. I don't understand because I'm not, a transgender person, why someone who was born with male genitalia feels that they are female. But our job is to listen. And that's what Pope Francis is urging us to listen to the experience of people. And only then can we only begin to understand what people have gone through. We cannot argue with people's experience, with their feelings. The problem, I think, with uh, the church's approach, the teaching of the church in the past, is that it was all from the head. We did not listen to the experience of people. And so Pope Francis is urging us to do just that, to listen to people's experience. So his message to LGBT people would be share your experience. Be loving with your parents and your family and your church, but do not hide. Try to share your experience.
Jeannine, what about the Eucharist? Gay people go to Mass. Um,
Hmm.
I assume they go to Eucharist
Yes. Mhm.
because, Jesus instituted the sacrament,
Right.
uh, not for, the good, but for everybody.
Right.
And but the church's official position, I assume, is still the same, that they don't want gays to go to communion.
It, no, the official position actually depends, I guess, on your bishop. But if we go by the Bishop of Rome, Pope Francis urges all LGBT people to come to communion. He says that the Eucharist should not be used as a punishment. He says we are all sinners in one respect or another. No one is perfect. And the Eucharist is meant to help us to be close to God, to purify ourselves. So if we are to follow any bishop, I would follow the Bishop of Rome.
Hmm. Yeah, when Jesus instituted the Eucharist at the Last Supper, I mean, he gave it to one person who, betrayed him. Uh,
Absolutely.
he gave it to another who denied him 3 times.
Mhm.
It was quite a collection of characters, and Jesus didn't discriminate.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so therefore, neither should we. I think the problem is that we don't look and follow the Gospels enough. We need to live what Jesus was telling us, to live the message of Jesus.
Yeah, Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict, he once said that the church talks too much about rules and not enough about Jesus.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%, even though I might disagree with Cardinal Ratzinger or Pope
We'll
Benedict.
we'll get to him in a few moments in the airplane. Stay
Oh,
tuned,
yeah.
everybody. Don't go away. So then you met Father Bob Nugent, who
Yes.
also had a ministry to gays and lesbians, and you started New Ways Ministry in 1977.
Yes. Well, I met Father Bob Nugent in Philadelphia in 1971 when I met Dominic and Dominic's friends, and we began to have home liturgies. And of course, we needed a priest, a male ordained priest in those days, to celebrate Eucharist. And Father Bob Nugent offered his service. I have to tell you a funny story about this, because Dominic was the activist, and so he arranged for me to have an interview with the major newspaper in Philadelphia. And then I received letters, letters to the people wrote to the paper, and the newspaper sent the letters on to me. And the letters, I got a couple dozen letters in conservative Philadelphia in 1971. And Philadelphia at that time, as it is now, over 50% Catholic. So we're talking about a Catholic constituency that read this newspaper, and I get these letters, and almost all of them were congratulating me and thanking me for what I was doing. And I was very surprised, I must say. But one of the letters was from a priest named Father Robert Nugent. And he said, if there's anything I can do, let me know. So, of course, I got in contact with him and asked him if he would be a celebrant for the liturgies. But the funny part of that story is when Bob would tell the story, he would say, and I've never used those words again. If there's anything I can do, let me know, because it turned around his life as well.
I know.
I'm sorry.
No, go on.
So we had these home liturgies
Yeah.
at Dominic's apartment or the apartments of his friends. And when I left Philadelphia, and then I taught for a number of years at the College of Notre Dame of Maryland. But meanwhile, Bob, he was a diocesan priest, and he was transferring to a religious order and moved down to Washington, D.C., and worked during that time at the Quixote Center, which is a peace and justice center. Well, when the Quixote Center was expanding its staff, I joined the staff, and Bob and I began to do workshops from the Quixote Center, and we called them New Ways workshops, and they were workshops about lesbian and gay issues. And they were meant to educate the Catholic community about these issues, because we were ignorant. I mean, the Catholic community didn't know anything about homosexuality. Transgender, well, we hadn't even thought of that at that point in the early 70s and late 70s. So we started these workshops and called them New Ways workshops, because around this time, this was 1976, and then the Vatican came out with a document on sexual ethics. And following that document, there was one good thing about it, but at any rate, following that document, Bishop McGovero in Brooklyn wrote a pastoral letter on sexuality called Sexuality, God's Gift, putting it in a positive light. And in that letter addressed to all Catholics about sexuality in general, he said, we need to find new ways to bring the truth of Christ to lesbian and gay people. And so that's why we adopted that phrase, new ways.
Mm-hmm.
From
Was it
that.
partly ironical?
No, I don't think so.
I
I
was
think
wondering if Bishop Mugavera had a different idea of
no,
what
no, no.
it was more
Well,
open.
oh, well, he was very open. He was very progressive.
Yeah. Okay,
Yes.
well, that's awesome. Now let's get to the Lent.
Okay.
It was around that time, Jeannine, that I read some articles in the NCR, very short ones about your ministry.
Uh-huh.
And I called up Bob Nugent and I said, you and Sister Jeannine need to write a book. And you did. And I published in the late 70s this by
Yes.
you, Building Bridges.
Yes.
And that became a real benchmark and a real issue. And from that period on, you were almost a persona non grata in the Catholic Church. You were very popular on the Catholic speaking engagements. All the dioceses wanted you to speak and give workshops. But very often the bishop would say, no, 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 you can't have her. You can't have Father Nugent. It got so bad, and you continued in your ministry.
Yeah.
But it got so bad that the Vatican told your religious order, don't let her speak anymore, or you're going to be in trouble. And they pressured them, and things got worse and worse. And that lasted for years and years and years. What kind of suffering did you go through, and what kind of crisis was it for you to continue the ministry?
Well, I must admit that when there were complaints from church circles, it was mostly my religious community leaders who got the complaints, and shielded me. So I didn't suffer that much when there were complaints from bishops here in the United States, but they would contact, well, either my community leaders or the Vatican, and the Vatican would contact my community leaders. So on three different times from the 1979 into the mid 80s, the Vatican asked my religious superiors, the general superior in Rome, who then also contacted the provincial in Baltimore, where I lived, to investigate me and to recommend sanctions. Well, my community leaders who really assigned me, this was my obedience, is what we called it in those days, my obedience. They questioned me about how I was going about the ministry, and they wrote back to the Vatican that is doing the work of the church, and we recommend no sanctions. Well, I guess it was 1985 or 7. I can't remember the exact year, but that's neither here nor there. Finally, the Vatican said they would appoint their own commission. And that's when things got a little hairy. So we met, Bob and I, and our provincials, who were our team, and we had theologians also on our team, met with the Vatican Commission, and it was here in the United States. But we were no match, even though we outnumbered the number of people on the Vatican Commission. There was the question of, authority, if you will, power. But at any rate, what did I feel? During those days, I felt a lot of anger because I felt the process was unjust. But we just kept on. We just kept on doing what we were doing. But finally, the edict, I guess you might say, came down in 1999, and the most difficult time for me was between that time and 2000. But I don't like to talk about the difficult times.
Okay, just tell us about the airplane. You were flying to Rome.
Oh, okay. So
Okay.
as you know, my community leaders very much supported my work. They had assigned me to this work for decades. And my provincial, at that time, I had gone through a number of provincials and a number of superior generals, but my provincial at that time was very worried that I was going to get excommunicated. This was the time that Tisa Balasuriya, who was a theologian from Sri Lanka, was excommunicated for some of his views on Mary and whatever. So she said, we need to make a pilgrimage to the shrine where our foundress is buried, and she's buried in Munich. So we were on a plane from Rome to Munich, and we saw someone. She said, I think that's Cardinal Ratzinger. And I said, well, I don't think so. He looked very haggard. he had on a clerical collar, but that was about it. So we get on the plane, and the seat next to this gentleman is empty. So I sat down next to him, and I said, are you a priest? That's the first question I asked, because he had on a black shirt, but no collar. It was a black shirt. And he said, yes, he was a priest. And I said, well, I'm a sister. I didn't have my veil on at the time, but I'm a sister. And I said, I'm a school sister of Notre Dame. Do you know the school sisters of Notre Dame? Oh, yes, he said. My aunt was a school sister. Well, that was it. At that point, I knew who it was, because I knew he had an aunt in our community. But I said, oh, well, what was her name? He said, Ratzinger. I said, oh, so you're Cardinal Ratzinger. Yes, he said. And I said, oh, well, I'm Sister Jeannine Gramick. And he smiled and he said, oh, I have known you for 20 years, because for 20 years they had a file on me at the Vatican, at the CDF. So, well, we had a delightful conversation for about, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes or so. And he asked about how I got into the ministry, and I told him that. And he said, what did I do before that? And so on and so forth. And I asked him if he had ever met any gay persons. And he said, oh, yes. When the Pope, meaning John Paul II, and I were in Berlin, there was a demonstration of homosexuals. Now, that was his idea of meeting gay people in a confrontational situation. He had never had a personal relationship or conversation about being gay with someone who was lesbian or gay. And had I thought of it at the time, I didn't say that, but I wish I had, that you need to talk with people on a personal level, not in a confrontational situation. In fact, a friend of mine, her uncle is a good friend of Cardinal Ratzinger, was a good friend. And she had dinner with him, but she was not out. She didn't talk about her being a lesbian. So this goes back to what I was saying about how the personal is so important. But he had a great sense of humor, because I talked to him about a booklet called Always Our Children that the U.S. bishops had just put out. They had taken a number of years to revise it. And he said, oh, yes, Always Our Children. He said, he had given some recommendations. I said, oh, yes, well, they took your recommendations, and now the final copy is out. He said, I do not yet have a copy. I said, well, I have a copy. I was there at the bishops' meeting when they were giving out the copies, and I said, if I knew I was going to meet you, I would have brought you a copy. And we chuckled. He had a great sense of humor. I can't even remember some of the other things
Yeah.
we
Well,
chatted
it was quite a late night conversation, and you
about.
thought everything was going to be okay with you in the Vatican, but of course it wasn't.
It wasn't.
No, it even got worse. And in terms of them trying to get you to leave your ministry, which you never did, you were faithful. But then, since this is Lent and we're talking about Lent as a symbol, last year you had an Easter
Oh,
when
yes.
Pope Francis sent 2 letters.
Well, Francis, we've been in communication. We probably have 5 or 6 letters from him at this point. We started communicating in April because Frank DiBernardo, who's the current director at New Ways Ministry, had this idea to write to Pope Francis because Pope Francis is on record publicly as supporting civil unions for LGBT people. And this was something that the U.S. bishops had sanctioned New Ways Ministry for when both Frank and I testified publicly for this marriage equality. So, we were just doing it a little bit ahead of Pope Francis. So we wrote to him and told him some of our story. And we have since been in contact with him.
Not only have you been in contact, I wish I had the exact words. Maybe you have them and you won't mind saying them, but he congratulated you for your 50 years of ministry. And have you got it there, Jeannine?
Well, I have to pull it out. See how thick my Pope Francis
Don't
file
pull
is.
out, just through memory. He said that you've had a lot of suffering, but the second commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself, is part of the first commandment, and you've been faithful to that commandment.
Yeah. And he says, your letter reminded me, because we've been in contact, your letter reminded me of the style of God. God has God's own style to communicate with us. And I would summarize that style, he says, in 3 words: closeness, compassion, and tenderness. He says, I'm thinking of your 50 years in this ministry, 50 years with God's style. You have not been afraid of closeness. And in getting close, you suffered. And that's the compassion. You suffered without condemning anyone. And you had great tenderness, the tenderness of a sister and a mother. Thank you, Sister Jeannine, for all your closeness, your compassion, and your tenderness. May Jesus bless you and the Holy Virgin protect you. Fraternally, Francisco. Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, Jeannine, we're going to end there, Jeannine. And I want to replay this and listen to that again. That perfectly sums up your life and your ministry. And I've known you for a long time, and you just exude compassion and closeness and goodness. And so thank you very much.
Well, thank you for this time together. I appreciate it. I liked it. I enjoyed it.
Good. I'm glad. So, folks, there it is, NCR for Lent. And NCR, the National Catholic Reporter, is one of the best independent newspapers around. It's an advocate for social justice and spirituality and faith. It has it all. And go to ncronline.org and see what it's all about. We'll see you next time. Our next interview for Lent is going to be with Father Jim Martin, another favorite person of everybody. Bye-bye. Bye, Jeannine.
Bye.